Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Matt Stover, Director of Charging and Energy Services, North America, Ford Motor Company. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Well, thank you for having me, Grayson. I'm really excited to have our conversation this afternoon.
I'm looking forward to this because Ford's taking a leadership position on all things electrification. Recently introduced two magnificent vehicles that are sold out and getting rave reviews, in the Ford Mach-E, the Ford F-150 Lightning. But the most important part of that to your end customer is charging. They're going to have to be able to charge their vehicle when they're out enjoying their vehicle, which raises the question, Matt, what is the current state of public EV charging globally?
Well, let's talk about, I want to sort of step back before I address that question, because I think it's one of the things that's really, really important about owning an EV. It's one of the great things about owning an EV. And that is your ability to charge at home. It's a fabulous convenience. And when we look at the behavior from our customers, a significant amount of their charging takes place at home. And that's just a simple experience for them that takes literally 2 seconds. You walk in, you plug in, and you go and set about the rest of your day. And so it's a terrific convenience for the customer. Now, when we look at public charging right now, the industry is in its infancy. It's been around for about 10 years, but the network growth, I should say, it's a toddler going to early teen ages. And it needs to grow as the industry needs to grow. If we look at overall EV penetration, just to give you some context, on a global basis, it's less than 7% in any given volume in terms of percentages. So we're really early in this EV journey. And from our perspective, the industry needs to continue to grow the infrastructure that's in place to support the needs of our customers. It needs to grow in new modalities in terms of the way the customers use charging. I'm on a long trip. I need chargers along the highway so that I can charge my vehicle to enable that long trip. Live in a city, I don't have access to charging because I parked my vehicle on a street. I need charging infrastructure near me that is convenient and useful to allow me to charge my vehicle on a regular basis. I work and I leave my car parked for 9 hours a day at work. That's a terrific place in certain places to do charging for the customer. In places that have a significant amount of solar load that come in, actually, the vehicles can be a great source of storage capacity for solar energy that is created. And workplace charging is a modality that we really need to put in place in these areas. And so I think that when you look at charging, we're early in the development of the infrastructure. The way that infrastructure develops is going to be different than what we think about with gas right now. Right now with gas, we have a typical venue for filling up your vehicle. It's at a gas station. They all kind of look alike. They're in similar types of places. Charging is going to be different from that. You're going to have charging on gasoline forecourts for sure. You're going to have charging in parking lots at your local retailer, and you're going to have chargers at work. And the spectrum of all of this charging capacity is what's going to enable our customers to feel confident that an EV is good for them. What we see with customers is once a customer starts to understand that there's infrastructure out in the market and in their daily life, they can get over the idea of the fear of range anxiety, because the technology that we're putting into these vehicles is giving them that confidence that the vehicles can go a long distance on a particular charge. Now they just have to get over the fear that they have as it relates to, are there chargers out there?
We're going to get over the fear. Convenience. I'll give an example I thought of when you were speaking. For instance, a family goes to Costco in their F-150 Lightning. They plug in their vehicle to charge while they're inside shopping at Costco. They come out, their vehicle says has 25, 30% charge. They can get home. That's convenience. They don't have to stop and go to the gas station, get your hands dirty. Some of the situations, they can enjoy their Costco experience. The F-150 can hold all of their stuff. You've got the frunk and you've got the bay. That becomes convenience. Do we have experience like that starts to win the customers over when their friends say, hey, I went to Costco, I got my groceries, charged my vehicle at the same time. This is great.
We're seeing a lot of interest from retailers in charging infrastructure for that exact reason, Grayson. The average person goes into a big box store between 30 and 60 minutes. If you were to look at the necessary charge time to, let's say, fill up and charge up your EV, that matches up perfectly. And so it's actually a really great time to execute a charge event. Go to a gym, right? You're at a gym for an hour. You're going to see more and more gyms putting charging infrastructure outside because it's a really convenient opportunity for you to do the fill up. Is it different from what we know right now? Yes, it's different. But people can accommodate different as long as they know that it's there. They can rely on it and they can plan their trips to ensure that they have access to charging regardless of the type of trip that they want to make. If it's the quick trip out to a retailer, if it's a quick trip to do errands with the kids, if it's a long trip and I want to plan the shopping event halfway through the long trip, I can go to one of these retailers. It's just a question of how do we bring that information to the customer and how do we enable this charging capacity to be deployed on these sites where it's really quite ideal.
The business owner, the retail owner could use it as an economic tool to drive individuals in there to shop more. They can also use it as an incentive. Perhaps if you charge your vehicle, you don't have to pay for parking. I think there's going to be some really interesting models that come out there as retailers try and drive more individuals into the stores. Are you seeing any of that from your perspective?
We're seeing a significant amount of interest from retailers as it relates to the deployment of charging capacity. There are different business models that are in the market, and I'll give you a couple that are visible right now. For example, Electrify America on a number of different sites at Walmart has their infrastructure located within the lots and very near the front of the store, right? Very convenient experience, very visible experience, well-lit parking lots so customers can feel safe. A retailer where you can get many of your daily needs. That's one model. There's another model with Volta where they deploy charging infrastructure and there's a marketing relationship between the retailers in the area as it relates to that particular charger. And so there's different business models that I think we're going to see as we see the infrastructure proliferate. And it's really an exciting time. There's some really innovative business models that folks are conceiving of. And I think the thing that we will really be surprised by is where you end up seeing chargers and how you engage with those chargers from a transaction standpoint.
I think a lot about charger placement strategically, and I live in Florida, and Florida, if you want to call it, the home of master plan communities. There's more master plan communities I've ever seen in Florida than pretty much anywhere. A lot of those communities have a common trait where they have a pool or multiple pools throughout the community. Do we get to the point where these communities start having, if you want to use the term, charging centers located in the same way the pool? So you're going to go to the pool, you're going to go here to charge. Do we start to see that rolled out so we can expand the EV adoption in these large communities?
It's a really, really interesting question. In certain states, for example, in California, there are requirements that are being put in place for new builds as it relates to charging infrastructure at the home or in the community. And we're starting to see that right now. And you're seeing new builds conceived with the idea of enabling EVs in the future. So we do believe that we'll see that. Now, what's also interesting is we're seeing an explosion in the commercial real estate market in, let's call it, multi-use residential development. What do I mean? I mean these little developments that are sprouting up all over the country that look like little towns. And they're essentially apartment buildings with retail on the first floor. And these are being designed with EV infrastructure in mind. And so, with regards to new builds, you're seeing builders and developers take into account an expectation that EVs will be more popular in the future and will be more popular with their types of customers. And therefore, they're making accommodation for that. Of course, we need to address existing builds. And that's, I think, going to be places where there's more problems to solve.
If you look at the visionary community, I'll single out Sid Kitson's Babcock Ranch in Punta Gorda, Florida. He built it from the ground up, running on renewable solar. Every home has EV charging. He really saw the future for EV, and that's the way that he built it. And another thing Sid did, and Sid, thanks for what you did for the residents there, he built it to hurricane standards. They did not lose power during the last hurricane, and no damage was infected the way that they built it. So that's a visionary developer, but then that's a new build. On the other side of the house, you have pre-existing builds. You have apartments, you have older homes throughout the country, and there's a startling statistic that 1/3 of Americans live in a rental home. Some do not have access to power in the garage. Others, the landlord said, no way, Jose, sorry, you can't upgrade it. How will those individuals be able to embrace an all-electric future?
Well, I think that it's going to be a process. And it's like so many things when we think about charging infrastructure, there's not going to be a simple silver bullet that's going to solve the problem for our customers. I think that number one is as more consumers want EVs and live in these situations, this will become a consumer differentiator for them buying or renting properties, right? It will be when you buy a house, having a charger in the house will be seen as an asset. And when you go to rent a property, and if there's charging that's there for you, you will perceive that as an asset and therefore pay more for that asset. And so I do think that when you're early in a market, it works as an impediment. But as we transition from where we are to more ubiquity of EVs, it actually can be a driver. We're passing through that right now. I think number two is there need to be business models and technology solutions that make it lower cost and simpler for landlords to deploy charging infrastructure on their multifamily home, their multi-unit dwelling, or a single family home. It's just we need to figure out a way to drive that cost down and make it less intimidating for that landlord. We do believe that these things will come into play. We do believe that the market will drive it, but it will take a little bit of time.
Since some of these landlords have vast real estate holdings, are they required to upgrade the energy infrastructure? And are they going to be forced to eat that cost as well?
Well, there's different ways to handle that. And this gets to the question of technology and how do you manage charging at the site? There are ways for you to manage the cost. You just have to make that a simpler process for the landlord and also make it easier for the landlord to understand that these solutions exist. In many cases, this is a new thing for landlords. They're not out there doing their research on EV charging to be deployed at their site. There are solutions that exist, and how do you get that information from these companies into the hands of the landlord as they make these decisions and consider these investments? In some cases, you'll have to make upgrades and investments, but we do believe that over time, as we move to an EV fleet and more ubiquity for EVs, this is going to drive people to make these investments because it will be something that makes it relatively more attractive for someone who's considering moving into one building versus another.
What role will utilities play in upgrading the energy grid? Will they play a significant outsized large role in that?
Utility is an important partner here in terms of ensuring that there's enough distribution capability to bring power to the site and that it's simpler and easier to commission at the site and work with its constituents to manage the cost of those investments. So they're going to be a player without a doubt. There are some permitting processes that I think that the utility infrastructure and the consumers as well as commercial companies that are deploying infrastructure that we can make this simpler for our customers. It's a little bit too Byzantine. And then number two, is there a way that we can work collectively together to commission this hardware in a faster amount of time? In some places, it can take a little longer than others. And so, as we see more demands for charging infrastructure to be deployed across the country, we believe that this is going to become a priority within the utilities in terms of commissioning, because this is good for their business, right? I mean, this isn't bad for them. This is good for them. And that they, as a market, will create a solution that makes it simpler for companies and consumers to deploy infrastructure.
You can make the argument they want it. Well, the issues are being worked out today with the utilities and the landlords and the multi-site homes. Those renters today, I'm just going to use the term majority because I don't know how many of them, actual number, they're relying on public charging infrastructure. If you go through, spend time on PlugShare, there's numerous complaints about chargers being broken. Ford had a solution. You said, aha, we're going to fix this. You rolled out the Charge Angels program. Is that having a positive impact on the brand? Because to me, it says Ford cares.
This has really been a powerful program for us. When we launched our vehicles, we saw the same information on PlugShare, and we've seen that manifest in the data that comes off of our vehicles. And I think we all understand, OEMs and charge point operators alike, that there needs to be an improvement in the reliability of the charging infrastructure. You as a consumer expect it, because your expectation right now is driven by your expectation when you fill a vehicle. When you fill a vehicle with gas, you don't worry about going to a gas station and not getting a fill up. You just don't. And that's a question at certain charging spots. Now, we launched the Charge Angels network so that we could, the Charge Angels fleet rather, so that we could have more vivid data as we look at all of these individual charge events, so that we could really, for ourselves, understand what are the issues that are leading to unsuccessful charging events or annoying charging events. The data collection from the fleet has been fabulous in terms of understanding the problem. So it's helping us frame the sources of the problem. The second thing that it's done is it's improved our conversation with our charge point operator partners, as well as hardware providers, the charger manufacturers themselves. It allows us to have a conversation that's built on data. And when you're talking about data, it's a dispassionate conversation. And so it enables us to have a transparent and data-driven conversation. The third thing is the Ford family's name is on the door. It's on the badge of every Ford vehicle. And we have a true cultural moray inside the company. And that is we want to treat our customers like family. And we really felt like we had to take an active role in terms of understanding what these issues are and looking at it through the lens of our customers, experiencing the problems from their perspective, and helping to solve problems within the infrastructure to ensure that as we move our fleet from a gas-powered fleet more towards an EV-powered fleet, our customers can be confident that when they buy a Ford vehicle, that they'll be able to drive that vehicle and have a successful charge. Now, are we there right now? No, we're not. We're working very hard. Are we improving? Absolutely. And since we've rolled out the fleet, we've seen some measurable improvements, and we expect to continue to see measurable improvements as we deploy fixes on both our side and as well as with our charge point partners.
In the data, did you see common patterns across the board where you were able to identify an easy fix based on a common pattern across thousands of chargers in multiple states?
There's some simple things. And if I were to sort of bucket the big sources of problems, I would say hardware issue and parts availability, right? There's global shortages in a number of different parts. And that is affecting the ability of charge point operators to replace and repair infrastructure. So that's one source. Two is when you look at this ecosystem, it's a very complicated ecosystem of software interaction. What do I mean? We have software that lives on the vehicle. We have software that lives on the charger. We have software that lives between the hardware and the charge point operator. And we have software that lives between our vehicle and our back end. And we have software that allows us to roam on other networks. So when you look at these permutations, there's a number of different points of potential failure. I think the single biggest challenge that we are all going to have to face is how we manage that ecosystem of software interactions so as to ensure a successful charge event for the customer. So you have physical problems and then you have software interaction problems. And software interaction problems tend to be the largest source of issue.
The problems are complex, but your customers that buy the F-150 Lightning or the Mach-E, they just want it to work. When do we get to the point where your customer can just go up and plug in and not have to be stressed out or worried?
If we just want to put it into perspective, when we look at our data, the vast majority of customers leave a charge site having gotten charged. So that's something that gives us a sense of confidence. Our first charge through, that's really how we measure success. And that is the first time I went to plug that charger in, was I successful? That's the gold standard. That has improved, but it needs to continue to improve. We believe that this is going to be a bit of a journey, but customers should feel confident right now, the vast majority of time, and upwards of 95% of the time, you are going to get a charge when you go to a site. We believe that right now, customers should feel confident that when you look at most people's behaviors and most people's needs, you can feel confident owning an EV. Does it need to improve? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the expectation is 99.9%. The expectation is first time charged through well over 95%, like the gas station industry. And that's where we have to move to.
You'll get there. Has the Charge Angels program had a positive impact on the Ford brand? It's a family business. Mr. Ford's name, as you mentioned, is on the door and it's on the vehicles. Has this program, has it had a positive impact on Ford's EV brand when the individual buys says, okay, we know we can charge this because it has the Ford name on it?
We've received really positive feedback. And what's been really kind of interesting is probably once every couple of weeks, I get an email from someone, a consumer, that emails me on LinkedIn and says, hey, can I be a part of the fleet? Right? Consumers want to be a part of it. And so that to us says, okay, this matters to consumers. They see the value in it. And geez, if you've owned an EV and driven an EV, you understand the importance of what we're doing with the Charge Angels. And so we believe that it's really had a positive impact on how people perceive our efforts to help support the EV community.
What you described as positive, passionate Ford customers, the big outstanding question is, where does the Ford Blue Oval charging network fit into this? Does it complement Charge Angels, or how does it fit in?
So the Blue Oval Charge Network is a great question. Is what we call a network of networks. And what we've done is we've worked with our partners to create access for our Ford customers to the most AC and DC public chargers in North America. And effectively, what we allow our customers to do through our digital tools and our connected vehicles is locate chargers, plan trips integrating those charge events, and then commission payment with one single method. For those folks that are familiar with EVs, you'll know that right now, if you go to a charge point network, you need a charge point account. If you go to an EVgo network, you need an EVgo account. If you go to Electrify America, you need an Electrify America account, so on and so forth. It's not incredibly convenient, and it resembles the mobile phone network in the early 90s, right? And so what we try to do with the Blue Oval Charge Network is make that payment process simpler for our customers. And with their Ford Pass app, enable a simple payment with one method and one account. Keep it simple. You don't need 5 different RFID cards in your wallet. You just need your Ford Pass app. That's it. Use it. It's going to get you to 85% of the chargers in North America. And it's a nice, simple experience for the customers. We will, as you know from recent announcements, be working with our dealership partners to deploy charging infrastructure on their sites. So in the near future, Ford customers will be able to rely on their dealerships for charging infrastructure.
You're building upon the existing infrastructure. That's very smart. The dealerships are strategically located in communities throughout the United States. Right now, the Ford Blue Oval charging network runs on over 75,000 chargers. Going back to our previous conversation, how do you ensure those are always working, since now it's part of the Ford network? It has Mr. Ford's name on it.
We do a couple things. Number one is we have our Charge Angels fleet out testing publicly. Number two is our vehicles are connected in a way no other Ford vehicle has been connected in the past. And we collect data about individual charging events on individual vehicles every second of every day of every year, now that we have the vehicles launched. We have aggregated that data and we analyze and we create a charger reliability score for our Ford vehicles as it relates to how successful we've seen our customers' charging experience at particular sites. We will begin reflecting that score in our digital experiences here over the near term. It wouldn't be too crazy to think that we might include that as part of a decision-making choice that a customer could deploy as they think about routing a trip, right? So how could you use that score to make it more reliable for our customers?
Smart, smart, smart. You're giving the consumers the one thing that you need to build trust: transparency. I repeat, Ford is giving their EV customers transparency. With the charger reliability score, if you're over 95%, 99.99%, does that become what I would call Ford approved, where you get the blue oval stamp seal of approval that this is a Ford approved charger? We know historically, based on data, that this will work for you.
Well, the user experience behind it, we're going to launch here over the near term. And I think right now what we'll do is we will have a score that will reflect for the chargers. And then over time, there'll be a criteria. There'll be a journey as it relates to how we utilize that charger reliability score. The team has a number of really innovative ideas that we're considering. But to your point, and I think this is a really important point, is that idea of transparency. Give the customer the information that they need to make a decision, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is use our connected vehicles to enable and empower our customers with that information.
It's smart. As Ford goes on to sell millions of EVs every year, I think, is there enough energy infrastructure currently available to meet the demand? You have the public waiting list numbers, you have your forecasted numbers. They're very big and it's very positive. But is there enough energy demand when all those vehicles are out on the grid, out on the roads every single day?
There's a number of studies that have been done on this in terms of generation capacity. We really do believe that there will be plenty of generation capacity, particularly as we see more renewable capacity come into the grid. I think that the big challenges that we will face will be related to distribution of that energy, not necessarily the generation of it. And there's more innovation that needs to be, let's say, deployed in terms of managing that distribution. I think from our perspective as OEMs, we have connected vehicles. And through the smarts on those vehicles, we can help work with our partners in the utility industry to optimally manage charging so as to allow them to manage their distribution issues. I think that technology will be able to solve this issue, and it's something that we'll be able to work through. But there'll have to be a coordinated effort between the OEMs as well as the utility infrastructure. And those efforts are in place. We're working on programs right now in that regard.
I'll give you the top 3 states for EVs. California has 563,000 registered electric vehicles. Florida has 95,000 electric vehicles in second place. And Texas has 80,000 electric vehicles registered. Texas and California share a common denominator. They have energy grid problems. What can the states do to prepare as California eventually is going to go over a million EVs? Texas is going to easily go over 500,000 EVs. So probably a very large for your F-150 Lightning will probably sell there based on geography. What can the states do to prepare for this?
I just asked for you to step back a second and think about that, because I think people often look at this as it's a negative, it's a risk, it's an issue, it's a problem. We have all this new demand that's going to come in from these EVs, and it's really going to overwhelm this grid. What's the fundamental issue from the grid's perspective? It's that we need to make infrastructure investments. Regardless if we had EVs coming in, we have to make infrastructure investments. The issues in California are not new. We're a decade into these issues. And these issues are not necessarily caused by the incremental load created by EVs. But what EVs can do is they can create an incremental load that justifies new investment in the infrastructure in these states. And I think that when we look at it that way, there's infrastructure investments that need to be made regardless if EVs grow, and EVs can become a positive catalyst in that conversation, that you can look at the problem a bit differently.
I like that. You can use the term, you're forcing the hand. Some of this infrastructure is completely outdated. It has to be upgraded. EVs are good for society. They're good for the environment. You're forcing the hand. Say, okay, time to upgrade the utilities. It's go time. You can't wait 5 years. Kick the can down the road like you do in Congress. It's time to go today.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's good for their business, right? It's more demand. It's just you have to make the investment to support that demand.
We'll see. They have to make it because it's all signs point to an EV future. Consumer demand points to it. But as much as regulators want to ban gas cars, consumers have clearly voted with their pocketbooks. They want EVs. And then once they get an EV, they're hooked on them. They might change brands, but they're not changing from electric back to gas. They're staying with EVs. It's clearly here. Underpinning all this, as we talked about throughout this whole conversation, will be EV charging. How do you see EV charging evolving over the coming decade? Will you build upon the Ford Pass app where it will be a frictionless experience when my mom goes or my grandma goes, where it just becomes part of our everyday life? Or how do you see EV charging evolving?
Number one, we expect to see an explosion in infrastructure over the course of the next decade, reflecting a variety of factors. Number one, incentives that are in the market right now with regards to the deployment of infrastructure. Two, standards in place at certain states to require ZEVs as a percent of particular vehicles, California of which being 100% out in the future. So we'll have regulatory driven. And most importantly, as customers get into the market, like you said, they love the EVs. And so we'll see a customer drive. So we see infrastructure growing significantly, reflecting these incentives and changes in consumers' behavior. Number two, you're going to start to see charging in places that you expect, right? Heretofore in North America, the large energy companies have not en masse deployed charging infrastructure on their forecourts. You'll start to see that. They're going to get into the business. They're in the business in Europe. They started to get in the business in Canada, and they're going to get into the business in the US. And so you're going to start to see charging in places that you expect at the gas station. But you're also going to see charging, in, per the earlier part of our conversation, in places that are new and unique. For example, at the big box retailers, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, the Lowe's, the Costco's, you'll see infrastructure deployed there because really, to your point earlier, it matches the amount of time people tend to stay in those stores. Going there for a fill-up can be really, really convenient. And then at workplace, we really believe that we're going to see more workplace charging. And quite frankly, it's one of the unsung, let's call it heroes in this conversation. I think we need to do more from a policy standpoint to make it simpler, easier, more cost-effective for workplaces to deploy charging. But if you can deploy workplace charging in a number of cases, you can address people's issues as it relates to charging in multi-unit dwellings. It won't be a silver bullet as we see the charging infrastructure evolve. It'll be, a quiver of arrows. And we do believe that that quiver is getting loaded very quickly over the course of the next decade. And I think that the last piece of this is that we need as an industry to continue to work together collectively, OEMs, charge point operators, hardware manufacturers, utilities, to ensure that the reliability of this charging experience is as predictable as it would be filling your gas car. And I believe that we can do all of these things. We're seeing the incentives come into the market to deploy the capacity. We're seeing charge point operators announce big plans for the deployment of infrastructure. And you're seeing these conversations take place in industry working groups and across the ecosystem to ensure that the charging infrastructure works for our customers.
It will work in the future, and in the future it will most likely have a 99% uptime. Is the connected vehicle the plumbing that makes this all a reality? Is that the plumbing that enabled Ford to build the EV charging and able to do all this?
The connected vehicle is a really critical piece of this. Number one, from the standpoint of delivering an experience that's simple for the customer. And then number two, in enabling us to analyze any challenges that exist with the vehicles and deploy solutions to them not instantaneously, but quickly. You don't have to go to the store. You don't have to go to the dealership to go do many of these fixes. Many of these things can be done through an OTA software deployment, and we can solve problems dynamically as they evolve in the field. And so it allows us to be much more nimble and to deliver better, more robust experiences for the customer.
It's amazing what we can do with connectivity. It benefits the business, it benefits the customer, and it benefits the environment. It's a win-win all around. And Matt, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
At Ford, we are very, very excited about an EV future. And we are very confident that we are going to create and deliver experiences that live up to the expectation of our customers. I tell a story. Oftentimes people worry about, are there enough chargers out there? Are the chargers going to be reliable? And we look at things through the lens of where we are today. And I think back to stories that my dad used to tell me about when he would go from Indiana to Washington, D.C. for college. And when he was in school, he was white knuckling it on the road trip from the middle part of the country to the coasts. Sounds familiar in the perception of customers. Did we get to the promised land? Absolutely, we got there. We are very confident we're going to get through this, and we're going to create just a terrific ownership experience for our customers. And I think that the message we'd like to leave is that our current and our potential customers should feel confident that we're going to get to that promised land as well.
EVs are the future. The Ford brand stands for quality because the future is bright, the future is autonomous, and the future is Ford Electric. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Appreciate it. And thank you very much for inviting us to this discussion. This has been a great discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.